behind every successful AI project, there are another 20 that haven't been successful. This started Juicero.
Oh yes, the famous Juicero.
Right. Building a juice pressing machine that cost $700. I knew the system didn't work. It was my job to oversell it, to say that it could do things that it couldn't do. And then when I walked out of the shop, I was like, oh my God, how did it pull this off? But then I realized that it takes 5 hours for me to get my receipt. And I immediately thought, this is fake. There are people watching the videos. One thing a lot of people are missing is that these hallucinations or little problems here and there of AI, they're not bugs that we're gonna fix in a second. They're not little glitches that we know how to fix. We just don't know how to fix them. Because you have all these engineers trying to innovate by solving problems that nobody has. And there are so many real problems that nobody wants to tackle. Look at self-driving cars. They never managed to produce reliable self-driving cars. Now the industry is dying because of that.
All right, so here's the thing. AI is so hyped at the moment that it's generally very hard to have a balanced opinion. If we're going to do a real science, we have to look both at the good and the bad things. And that's why I was very happy to come across this little book. I happened to be on a very long flight, and I read it back to back in one sitting because it's actually really hard to put down. And then what I did was contact the author, and the author was like, yeah, I'm gonna come. So here he is, Emmanuel Maggiori, AI consultant, writer and speaker who seems to be on a real mission to debunk a lot of hype in tech and AI specifically. The book in question is called Smart Until It's Dumb: Why Artificial Intelligence Keeps Making Epic Mistakes and Why the AI Bubble Will Burst. And he says that it was not written by ChatGPT. Emmanuel, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm happy to hear I made a flight a bit shorter for you. Where were you flying from?
I was flying from Ecuador. I was at a friend's wedding, and he was a long flight, so you did make it better. But my first question to you then would be, everybody's hyping up AI. Every other company is coming out as AI first now, and you are busy trying to debunk that and looking at the bad stuff. Why?
Well, because I have a lot of experience in failed AI projects. I've seen all of them.
I didn't see that on your LinkedIn.
Yeah, and I started being worried about this hype before the ChatGPT thing happened. AI was already hyped up before that. Companies were trying to be AI first companies, machine learning, they were trying to use it everywhere. And I already saw problems with that. I saw signs of a bubble about to burst. And at that point, that's when the ChatGPT thing happened. So it came back up again and a lot more. But I see the same problems. I see the same kind of project. I can predict it's not going to end well. And I think behind every successful AI project, there are another 20 that haven't been successful. And they're swept under the rug. Nobody talks about these other projects. And you will find that a lot of people who specialize in this field, they end up spending a lot of time working on things that will never be used. You build a product that sounded great, but nobody wanted that, or it's never going to solve the problem with the level of accuracy that's needed. So you end up working a lot on things that they end up in the garbage can. And that's not very motivating. And I found myself involved in those projects many times. Sometimes I've used machine learning in ways that were very useful, but many other times I was surprised quite negatively about what happened with those projects, including making us lie, making employees lie to clients, lie to users about how good the solution was. And that doesn't feel great. Once I had to give a presentation about a tool we'd built in this company, and it was an internal tool for the company. And after I spoke about this, someone said that he felt he was speaking with rocket scientists because how amazing everything was. But it was all a big lie. I knew the system didn't work. It was my job to oversell it, to say that it could do things that it couldn't do. So it didn't feel good. And that's when I started speaking about this AI hype, which has been happening on and off since the 60s. It's not new.
Yeah, so the 60s is a good keyword here. And I'm going to ask you just in a second about that. But before then, is it really AI specific, or is it just the hype cycle in tech that exists and it just happens over and over and it's going to be the next thing afterwards? Do you think there is any specifically different about AI hype cycle?
I think it's quite similar to other cycles, if you want, like blockchain. With AI specifically, I would say that we've definitely adopted AI in our daily lives. A lot of people are using ChatGPT to do things, for instance, right? So it's very practical in many ways. And even before that happened, we were constantly using machine learning. Whenever Google search sorts your search results, there's machine learning involved. When you get a product recommended on a certain e-commerce website like Amazon, there's machine learning involved. There's a system that learns from user preferences to recommend the best products for you. So I think the AI is a reality in our lives. It's a thing. Compared to maybe other technologies that didn't become mainstream, like maybe blockchain or augmented reality, with AI, it's a thing, right? And there are useful things you can do with it. And I think that makes perhaps the hype a bit more special. But I also think there's some weird fascination that people have with AI, almost a desire to create machines that are as intelligent as us. And I think, I don't know what it is. It's this sci-fi kind of thing, this Terminator, Ex Machina, her kind of thing. I've seen people, there was this live TV show, it was a news program, and they were trying out ChatGPT live to show to the audience when it just came out. And it made a mistake. It answered a question incorrectly. And the presenter, he was like, he was disappointed that it wasn't as smart as it seemed. It's like people want it to be real. They want AGI to be a thing. There's almost a religious behavior sometimes. I don't know if that's the right word. Not that there's anything wrong with religion. But we can say like a dogmatic approach sometimes to AI. People are captivated by it. They fall in love with it and they advocate for it in a very strange way. They're willing to ignore any mistakes that AI makes or just dismiss them. They can say, oh, there wasn't enough training data, or it's your fault. You didn't write the prompt correctly. But they defend AI a lot. So I think those are characteristics that maybe we don't see as much with other hyped up products.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really happy that you're bringing this up, because this is what makes it so difficult to make sense out of this, right? You've got a legit technology that's actually working well in some cases, right? That actually made a difference. Every student and every college student is now using ChatGPT to either improve their essays or maybe add to their essays or maybe write their essays, let's be honest here. That is a legitimately exciting development. It's just that we have this expectation that the progress is going to be linear, right? Or at least linear and ideally exponential. That, we achieved this much in this short of a time. That means that next thing, Terminator, Skynet, tomorrow. And it creates this religious experience where at the same time, I do feel like, as you were saying, you realize that there is something deeply rooted in human nature that wants us to create this thing and see what happens.
Yeah, you can see that also with these humanoid robots. That is every couple of years, there's a company that's supposed to create this humanoid robot. But nobody wants that. They keep failing because it's not solving a real problem very often, right?
I want one. I was looking at the Unitree yesterday, $16,000. That made me pause a little bit. I already started trying to justify in my head all the cool things that I could do with it if I come up with $16,000 to spend on it.
Right.
But I might not be representative.
I don't know. I've seen a nice robot dog that moved like a dog and stuff. But the thing is, sometimes there's fascination for certain things and a disconnection from what people really want. And we've seen that a lot with augmented reality. It's again, every year someone wants to create these fancy goggles, but it seems like it never works out. People don't want to walk around wearing fancy goggles, or they just haven't cracked the nut yet. They haven't found the way to make it work. And it's a technology first approach. And that's something I advocate against a lot in my book and elsewhere. I think we need to think first about what the customer needs and then try to find the best solution to the problem. Sometimes it's AI, sometimes it's something else. And that's what being an engineer means, right? You are finding the best solution to a problem. But very often they do it the other way around. And one funny case is the Amazon Fresh stores in London, or they're called Amazon Go in other places. They created this fancy AI technology, allegedly, to prepare your receipt automatically. So if you're logged into your Amazon account, you just walk out of the supermarket and you don't have to go to the checkout, right? AI will prepare the receipt for you. And the way this project was born was, again, AI first. They created similar technology for warehouses inside Amazon, for the regular Amazon online shop. And then they thought, what else can we do with this technology? And that's how they came out. What if we install this inside supermarkets so that people don't have to check out? Originally, the technology was meant to detect what warehouse workers picked up from shelves automatically, right? To track objects. So they thought, what else can we do? So they tried to push this technology into something else, and that was supermarkets. And it didn't go well at all. And one of the reasons was that people still buy things based on the price, the deal, the supermarket that's most convenient or cheapest, right? They didn't care so much about the technology. And also, if you live in London, so you know that most supermarkets have self-checkout machines now. So there are almost never any queues anymore, right? So being able not to use a checkout machine saves you a few seconds, maybe. It's not dramatic change. And it's not cheaper to run for the supermarket. We could think, okay, at least it saves the supermarket some money, but they still need people to run it. They need people to replenish the shelves. And they actually even need an employee by the door to explain to people how to use the technology. So nobody needed that technology, right? And it failed commercially, but it also failed technically. And this is another interesting part of the story. The first time I walked into the shop, it was a friend who told me, look, it's AI that does the receipt for you. And I was immediately skeptical because I've worked a lot in AI, and I know the problem with AI has been, and still is, edge cases. All this long tail of weird things that can happen that there's often no training data for. I immediately thought, what if I pick something from the shelves, I give it to a friend to hold it, then my friend puts it back on another shelf. There's so many things that could happen, right? So I was very skeptical that they could make it work. And then when I walked out of the shop, I was like, oh my God, how did they pull this off? But then I realized that it takes 5 hours for me to get my receipt. And I immediately thought, this is fake. There are people watching the videos here. They're somewhere. And I wrote a blog article about that. And about a year later, it came out that actually they had an army of 1,000 people watching the videos. There was allegedly some AI involved, but 70% of the time, a human had to look at it. Yeah. And that's the typical failed AI project. AI first instead of customer first, and then all these technical issues because you ignored some of the limitations of AI. And this is why I speak so much about AI, because I want to prevent people from having these bad surprises.
The silver lining here, though, is that we got a brand new meme on the internet that AI stands for associates in India. And that's probably never gonna go away now. Yeah, I think it's probably the same mechanism that makes me want to buy a bright green Lamborghini. I obviously, just full disclosure, I'm happily married and thank you. No, I'm not having a midlife crisis. But the same way I wanted one when I was 5, I still do. I'm not gonna buy one because it would be a terrible purchase, because I don't really need one. But I do. And the same way I think I want a robot.
Right.
And I want the store to figure out what I bought.
Yeah.
Although, yeah, I had the same thing. Like I went to the one in London and I walked out and I was like, okay, where's my receipt? I want to check that it won't work well. And then I see, oh, actually, you have to wait. It's like,
something's shady.
This is a little fishy.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, not going well. All right, so I understand that. You mentioned the 60s. What happened in the 60s? You've got a few pages, and I appreciated that it's a pretty brief history of previous AI winters, but let's maybe touch on that briefly.
Yeah, there were at least 2 waves of hype that happened previously with AI, and they were followed by what were called AI winters, because the expectations weren't met, and there was a dip in enthusiasm about AI, to the point that it almost became embarrassing to say that you worked in AI. So to cite an example, there was the first one in the 60s. Computers were totally new, but people were already saying in 20 years, they will do anything a human can do. And there was a lot of simulating a little world kind of AI. Right? Let's try to create a simulated world where we imagine where the blocks go or how they move and some physics simulations. And they thought they could achieve a lot of things with that, but it didn't go very well. In the 80s, there was a new wave of enthusiasm called the expert systems, which was this attempt to encode the knowledge of experts in a machine and then have the computer do that. So you encode whatever a doctor does to diagnose a patient as a list of rules. So there were lots and lots of rules here written by hand, usually, and then the computer will do that for you. And they hyped it up a lot, and there was a lot of money invested, but then it didn't work out. Again, it was, very hard to write down the rules, to even know what the rules would be to do the job that you do sometimes. So again, dip in enthusiasm. And I think that lasted for quite a long time, this lack of enthusiasm. It didn't die off completely. And then there was in the 2010s a new wave of enthusiasm, which was the machine learning era, right? Which is now the computer will learn from data, right? So that's how it's going to build its own rules, if you want, just like the expert systems did. But we're going to do it better because the rules are going to be learned by imitating how people have done the job before. You have thousands of images with labels, with the right labels written down by human. So you have a picture of a strawberry and a label saying strawberry, and then the computer will learn how to classify images. That was a new wave of enthusiasm. The internet had become very popular by then, and there was a lot of data. So now a website like booking.com, it's collecting a lot of data. So the machine can learn patterns about what travelers want, what customers want. And this was this new era of enthusiasm. And in 2016, I think there was this computer winning at the game Go against a human that caused a lot of noise. A lot of people were saying computer will never win against a human. That can't happen. And it did happen. And there was also the popularization of convolutional neural networks, which are a method to detect what's inside an image that worked very well, right? So a lot of these things happen. And for the first time, and that's what's different compared to the previous two waves of hype that were very academic. So this time, there were real applications. Machine learning was deployed successfully within commercial products. And it started to die off, I think, a little bit because people were realizing maybe that it wasn't as great as it seemed, but it was still quite high, I would say, the enthusiasm. And then ChatGPT happened, right? Kind of pushed it up again. That's in a nutshell the history of like ups and downs of enthusiasm.
Yeah, so recently I learned a new word that apparently people use, vibes. And now I realize just how much of the world runs on vibes, and it always has. I wanted to touch briefly on the Go you mentioned, AlphaGo, and prior to that was it Deep Blue that beat Kasparov? I found it interesting because people seem to really love this kind of demos. This game is so hard, and I guess most people suck at it. Most people never go really past I know the rules, but I've never really took it seriously, and I am really bad at chess. And then you see the guy who's supposed to be the best in the world, and he's getting his ass handed over to him by a machine. And all of a sudden, it's like, Terminator tomorrow. And then we've got the AlphaGo that's got even more states. So I think the argument was like, okay, the computers can't win at this game because we'll never make a computer that's quick enough to calculate all the possibilities. I never know how that maths works, but there's always something about number of atoms in the universe versus the number of combinations. But it happened, right? And all of a sudden, we've got this new stimulus to think, oh my goodness, we are doomed. The Terminator was right all along. Yeah. Why do we like this game? Shouldn't we look at something more applicable? We all know that these are perfect scenarios for computers because the rules are well defined. We can know exactly what's wrong, what's right. Why are we so fixated with that?
I think you're making a good point there, because what happens with a game like Go or chess is that you can very easily know who won the game, right? It's a very simple algorithm to know who won the game, which means that if you want to create simulated games of a computer playing against itself, you can do millions, even billions of simulations of games, right? And always know who was the winner at the end. So you have reference data that can help you find out which moves are good and which moves are bad, right? And that's what made it not easy, but what made it easier to train this machine learning model that played the Go game, right? That they created lots and lots of simulated games with a label saying this is the winner. However, in most applications, it's not that easy to generate that label that says this is the good solution or bad. That's how machine learning learns, right? From examples. So if you are trying to train a model to learn how to translate between two languages, you can create simulated translations. You can say, okay, I'm going to take this, I don't know, this piece of English text and simulate the translation to French so that then a machine learns. Because if you can do that, you've already solved the problem, right? You already have a system that can translate, right? So the reality is that translation at the moment learns from humanly translated text. People take documents in two languages, for example, translated in Canada, where we have French and English, right? So there's a lot of official documents that are in both languages. So that's how it works for the most of it, the translation. So it's not, in the ideal world, we will still need humans in the loop to create the data. So it's such an idealized scenario, this game playing AI. I think there's a bit disingenuous a little bit sometimes how they portray these advancements. And that's why people also get so excited about that. But with Go, for instance, the paper they published in Nature, the title was Learning to Play Go Without Human Knowledge. And this sounded magical. Imagine a computer without any human knowledge learns how to play the game. And the title is incorrect. I don't think the paper should have been published with that title, because the whole system was designed based on human knowledge on what a good strategy is to play the game. That's why they used a convolutional neural network, for example, because they thought that the board is a grid and this is similar to an image, so we can use the CNN. Now, there was a lot of knowledge in building the system. Then they used simulated games instead of a record of actual games. So that's where there wasn't human knowledge, right? The computer played against itself, but the system had human knowledge everywhere. And that's why it's such a misleading title, and it caused a lot of confusion. Once someone approached me and told me, why do you even need training data anymore? I heard that now a computer can create its own simulated world and learn from that, right? And this came from this AlphaGo system and this paper saying you can learn without human knowledge. So I think that those ideal scenarios are very different from what you can actually do for most applications.
That's what you get for sensational news reporting. It sounds much more exciting when you title it like this than without automated simulated games, but we still had to get involved.
And that was a scientific article, right? That wasn't reporting in the news. That was the title of a peer-reviewed scientific article. And that's what's so worrying about this field.
Yes. Although I think the spillage from the news cycle into the academia is a different subject that we could probably do another podcast episode on.
We'll leave that for another day.
Yeah, exactly. Every time you speak to people who had spent some time in academia, the conversation always ends up with this. And It's a little scary. But I wanted to talk briefly about the language, because you mentioned this constraint that we need this human translated pairs of languages to be able to teach a model to translate. And that's obviously true. However, language is such a weird thing. I often think about it as a virus because, hear me out, right? It needs human hosts to spread, right? We learn from other humans. We can also learn from video and stuff like that. But before the video, we would just learn from other humans. If everybody stopped speaking one language, it would just die. There would be it wouldn't recover itself. So there is this kind of temporal dimension here that has to have enough hosts infected for the population to keep going, right? And that's why I find it such an interesting problem for machines, because how are we expecting them to pick it up other than the same way that we pick it up from other humans? So like by definition, it's going to require a human interaction in some form or another. But Anyway, just a quick
Yeah.
detour on that. I don't know if you agree with my little theory here.
Yeah, it's a good way of seeing it. I think that the way we learn anything, but also the way we learn languages, it's still not fully understood. But there are some things people know that we're born with techniques to learn. They're innate. We can learn by a process of elimination, for example. It seems that babies already know that. We have very rich cues when we learn a language from other people because people can point a finger at something, right? They can point their finger toward this butterfly on the sky, and then the baby learns the word butterfly in one go. So there are lots of things that happen in a way that our learning is very rich and has lots of shortcuts, I would say. And people have struggled to produce those shortcuts or yet in machine learning. So machine learning still needs lots of examples, probably lots of sentences with the word butterfly in it to learn to translate the word butterfly, right? So still people are studying and how you can try to build shortcuts, but I feel like human learning is still a lot richer, and that's why we can learn so effectively.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about what works for AI today. So this is August the 30th, 2024. According to you, what are problems that have been effectively solved by AI, and what are the legitimate success stories that we should be talking about? And then we're going to talk about the other ones.
I think there are a lot of new things that we do with AI that we wouldn't do. Because sometimes it seems that AI is replacing human workers, and I think it will replace some human workers, but sometimes you just do things you wouldn't do. And an example, think of the translation of hotel reviews on websites like TripAdvisor or Booking.com. I think it's very unlikely they would hire people to translate every single review, right? There's thousands of them. So with AI, they managed to translate reviews automatically. So as a traveler, you end up seeing, lots of reviews that sometimes they're now written in your language, but you can still understand if the hotel's good, if it's clean, or whatever you want to know. I think it's been very successful in applications where hallucinations don't matter much. So mistakes don't matter much, right? And the translation of hotel reviews is an example of that, right? If there are little mistakes, nobody cares, right? The travelers will not care that it's not a perfect translation. When we think about recommendation systems, if you're shown a product at the top of your search results that's recommended to you, but it's not really what you want, that's okay. Nobody dies. So I think there's been a lot of optimization in that sense of the way we browse the web, the way we find information that AI has been very helpful with. And then with LLMs, I also think I have a friend whose English isn't very good. His grammar isn't very good, but now he manages to write pretty good English thanks to using LLMs. So you can see how, and it can also, I think it can help you spot problems. And that's why using it as an assistant will be very helpful, I think, for a lot of people. A lot of people are using it to code. I use it sometimes, not a lot, but I use it sometimes. I think it's useful when you can describe the task very easily and also very easily validate the output. For example, I sometimes forget how to, you're a software engineer, so maybe you've done this when you need to download a file from an S3 bucket from AWS. So I don't know why, but I always forget how to use this library. I've done it before. So I can go to ChatGPT now and just ask, how do I download a file, or write a snippet of code in Python to download a file from S3? Very easy to describe it. And then very easy to validate, because when I look at the code, and this is something we need to be aware of, AI hallucinates and it will continue to hallucinate. So you always need to validate that it's doing what you want. But it's very easy for me to validate that because I've done it before, because I can run the code very quickly. So those easy to describe, easy to validate tasks, I think AI will help a lot with that. It can be very useful. It's not that different from maybe what we did before, which was search on Stack Overflow or on Google, but it can make it a bit easier, a bit more expedited, the process. So I think it will work very well as an assistant for a lot of people, especially to help you do things that you already know how to do, not new things so much, right?
Yeah, so the co-pilot, the support junior developer. I think a lot of people would agree with you, and I include myself in that group, that this is a really good use case. And it's like going from I don't know, I used to be one of those guys who had my Vim configured that I spent countless hours of doing, and then I would type everything. And then slowly I would go more towards the IDE experience where it can autocomplete code. And then when you have a plugin for help Copilot or something like that, it just guesses because it's been written so many times and it's so obvious that there's really no point spending time on that. And I think this is the natural kind of evolution of that. It works really well. But for a lot of people, the fact that a year ago they didn't have it and now they have it means that tomorrow they expect it to be twice as good and do things for them and make them redundant. And I think this is probably the fallacy that kind of goes well with that.
Yeah, I think there's a big fallacy there, a logical fallacy that has been perpetrated by a lot of people. I have this book over here. I don't know where it is. It's a gigantic, here, I'll show it to you. Everybody knows this book, but it's so thick. I can't even pick it up. Here, look. The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil. We're talking thousands of pages. And what this book does, it's this guy probably. The guy that says that the world's coming to an end in 5 years every year, and he's moving the goalposts. But the thing with this fallacy, and this is what he calls it, the law of exponential returns or something like that. This idea is that technology is growing exponentially. So at one point, robots will take over the world, right? But the problem with that, and that's where the logical fallacy, if you want, lies, is that any true advancement requires innovation, the discovery of a new way of doing things, right? And you can't predict when that will happen. It's super, super random. If you can predict it with any certainty, it means that you know how to do it, or you have a clue of how that would happen. And you would have already done it if that were the case. You would have received money from venture capitalists to do it, billions probably, right? And there are many examples of how that pivotal moment didn't happen. One of them is fusion-based nuclear power, right? They've been telling us for decades that it's going to happen, right? Nobody has been able to find the way to do that efficiently, to produce electricity with nuclear fusion effectively. And with AI itself, there have been discoveries or inventions, if you want, that have been pivotal, but they happen in the most random ways. One of them was the transformer architecture that was designed a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, by people from Google. And that's what led OpenAI to build ChatGPT, right? They used this methodology, and it's not that complicated. It solves some obvious problems with previous techniques to process language, and they invented a new way of processing language called the transformer architecture. And then previously, we've had similar things with convolutional neural networks. Image recognition wasn't great until CNNs became popular. They had been invented a long time before that, but nobody was using them. And then all of a sudden, people started to use them, and GPUs made it easier. And now we're at this stage where we don't know that new discovery will be to take AI to the next level. For example, to eliminate these hallucinations. Nobody knows how to do that. If they did, they would probably have done it by now with so much money and people working on it. We just don't know. Are we going to find out in a year's time, in 20 years' time, in 50? I can't tell you, because you can't predict when something will be discovered. And I think that's the problem with these predictions, right? Like this law of exponential returns, is that you're assuming that the future will be like the past potentially, or you assume it's just a matter of time. They often say that it's just a matter of time, but it's not. Look at self-driving cars. They never managed to produce reliable self-driving cars. Now the industry is dying because of that. And the problem is hallucinations, right? We still don't know this methodology to use machine learning in a way that's more effective than that and can deal with edge cases better. So what's going to be that new development? I don't know. When is that going to happen? I don't know. Could be in 50 years. And we're already seeing that. There's a bit of stagnation at the moment in the development of these models. A lot of people are saying, okay, it's diminishing returns now. It's flattening. As of today, this GPT-5 hasn't been released yet. It was promised a long time ago. And then there was GPT-4 Omni that came out that was like not too different from the previous one. It feels like now it's flattening. And that's why now you have all these companies saying, oh, maybe the investments will not pay off that much. You have Goldman Sachs saying that.
Yeah, and another point I think is worth underlining here is that hype itself also obviously heavily affects the progress rate, how it happens, right? That all the money and all the pressure and all the people who jump into that, I suspect to a certain degree at least, it helps initially. But then all of a sudden people get a little bit bored with that, they move on to the next thing, and you're going to have a dry spell, another winter, if you will, that possibly holds all the development of that. So it's got like this accelerated, all the money, all the people, everything. And then if you don't hit the next milestone quickly enough, it's going to dry up. And this is such a weird thing that makes it even more difficult to predict, right? Because the human nature, because people want to make money, and because people want a little bit of fame here and there.
Yeah.
Another confounding variable in this situation. So many other things to point out. Self-driving cars, I guess let's leave it for a moment. I was testing my self-driving in my Tesla yesterday because I installed another update and I was very excited about it. But let's talk about it in a sec.
Yeah.
Going back to my initial question, what do you think is the biggest blind spot or a thing that people are missing about AI today?
One thing a lot of people are missing is that all of these hallucinations or little problems here and there of AI, they're not bugs that we're going to fix in a second. They're not little glitches that we know how to fix. We just don't know how to fix them. There's no methodology to get rid of them. Because I've sensed a lot that people thought, oh, they just need to fine tune it a little bit until that stops happening. But that's not the way it works. And I think
it's a feature.
Yeah, it's a feature at the moment of those systems. And I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings. And I've seen some companies already suffer from this because they start up building a product around an LLM. So behind the scenes, an LLM is solving the problem for you, right? But then they see those glitches and they thought they would be fixed. But then they realize that customers aren't happy. Even if it's a small percentage of the time, they aren't happy with a system that errs, badly. And they thought it would be fixed within a year. But then a year later, they still have the same problem. And they probably will still have it in 5 years. That can ruin your business, right? I think we need to understand that hallucinations are probably going to stay, and you need to learn how to live with that, or use AI for applications where it's not that important if sometimes there are mistakes.
I 100% blame sci-fi writers and movie directors from the 90s for this. Because do you remember that scene in The Terminator where Sarah Connor and the kid, they went to sleep and Schwarzenegger is standing there all night, barely moved, and is looking out for danger? And how she's basically describing that he's the perfect protector and the perfect father, and she almost has a crush on him, if I remember correctly. And that kind of created this idea in my head of a robot that's not only intelligent in a way that we are, but better at being intelligent in a way that we are, right? That doesn't make mistakes. And if you've, like me, mentored like junior developers, you see a lot of mistakes. And these are people who spend 5 years at uni, then maybe spend a couple of years here, a couple of years there, and they've been doing it for a very long time, and they make very basic mistakes. And obviously, I was no different. Everybody does it. And then that's why we have code reviews. That's why we have steps in between to not let that stuff go into the wild and embarrass everybody. And somehow, with AI, with LLMs in particular, we're like, okay, fine, so this is great, but now you can't make mistakes. And also, don't hallucinate. And even though the whole thing is hallucinating, that's how it works, right? So I found it very interesting that we've got that, and I suspect Cameron is to blame for that. Was it the second Terminator? Yeah, I think,
In the second one, Cameron. Yeah. That's as far as I got. I watched the first one and the second one,
Well, it was the good ones then. The first one, the second one, and then went downhill from there. I was going to ask you, you seem to have a problem with cows on the beach. Why is there a problem with cows on the beach?
I don't have the problem. AI has the problem. I told this story in my book. This AI system meant to categorize pictures automatically. And at one point, the researchers who built it realized that it couldn't detect a cow when it was on the beach. There was a picture of a cow on the beach, right? And it failed to recognize the cow. It was the gigantic cow, and it couldn't see it. And the reason for it, as they did some research, was that most pictures of cows in the training data were on grass. That's where cows tend to hang out, right? So the system had learned that a cow was this thing that looks like a cow plus the grass, right? That's what it learned. So when you took the cow out of the context, it failed to recognize the cow. And that's a problem that's been plaguing AI for quite some time because it learns by seeing examples of how to do the job, images paired with labels, for example. And the problem is the long tail of strange situations that don't happen very commonly. And that's when AI tends to make those mistakes and hallucinate. And the problem, it may seem silly, but it's actually a lot deeper than it seems, because maybe you will collect more pictures of cows and it will learn what a cow truly is. But there could be another similar problem with another object. There's always this very long tail of very strange situations that aren't covered in the data. And humans, we seem to be very good at coping with those. I don't know if people understand very well why. But another more recent example is this self-driving car that hit a truck that was being towed on the road, but it was being towed in an uncommon way, right? I think it was they attached it in a weird way. I don't remember the details, but the car didn't detect at all that this gigantic object was blocking the road and it just hit it. And then 10 minutes later, another car by the same company hit it again, like a different car hit the same tow truck. And the reaction that people have to those things is to try to plug the hole. They're like, okay, we patch this so that towing a truck in a weird way is fixed. But then what are you going to do with all the other weird things that could happen, right? Because that was such a strange thing. But there are so many. And that's what's killing self-driving cars. That's what can make the use of AI so problematic in critical, on mission critical systems. I think that cow example is a very simple way of understanding the problem with current AI. But also humans, like we wouldn't think that there's nothing on that road. We wouldn't hit that truck, even if it's being towed in a weird way. And that's what would, I don't know exactly how it works. You don't learn in driving schools all the weird things that could happen on the road, right? You're able to cope with all those things. But currently AI, it needs to see examples. And that's part of the problem.
Yeah, somehow you know that if there is a fridge in the road, you probably want to avoid it.
Yeah.
Unless you're Francis from House of Cards, and in that case, you expect the fridge to get out of the way. A little reference for everybody who remembers that one. In my head, I also have a few counterexamples because I find myself doing very stupid stuff all the time. Like sometimes I go to the bin and I have two things in two hands, and then I walk away from the bin and I still have the rubbish in my hand. Mm-hmm. I'm like, oh, I wonder where my phone is now. Mm-hmm. And we do that and we give ourselves a pass. But then somehow in like more critical situations, we're mostly able to avoid that. Like I can potentially mistake a fridge for something else if my life is not on the line. But if it is on the line, I'm probably not going to do that. So I never understood how that works either. I don't know if you have any theories, but from just observation, it seems like there's something more to it too, right?
Yeah. Look, Jan LeCun, who was saying on a podcast, I think a few weeks ago, Jan LeCun was the inventor of deep learning. He was saying that we seem to adapt the efforts we put depending on the situation. When a problem is difficult, we will spend more time analyzing it, right? All the current methods used in AI for image recognition, for language processing, LLMs, they have a fixed number of steps to generate a response. So that there's no adaptation to the difficulty of the problem, right? So that could be one challenge there. Yeah, you can be distracted. You can make mistakes, but you can also be very focused and not make those mistakes. We also don't always think in terms of language, which is another thing that LLMs do. Everything's about language, predict the next word. Jan LeCun was saying, when we solve certain problems, we don't always reason in terms of words. We seem to reason other ways, with images, with representations of the physical world, and then we sometimes translate that into language. So he thinks there's something missing in the way those systems work, that we're better at that. But computers are better than us at many things, performing calculations, right? I don't know how to multiply in my head, but calculator does it for me. So it's not like computers are always, if you want, dumber than humans. But yeah, there are certain tasks that we can perform surprisingly well when we are concentrating. Some people tend to count the mistakes. They tell you, this many people die on the road every year, right?
Yeah.
If one fewer person died, if we use self-driving cars, then we should roll them out. But that's not quite right, because you need to qualify the mistakes too. Even if fewer people died, but sometimes the self-driving car would kill someone in a way that a human would have never done that. They would have never made that mistake, or very unlikely, or a human who wasn't drunk. Because people are like, oh, people drink and drive. Yeah, but you can attribute that responsibility to the driver. You have the system that hallucinates. Maybe potentially fewer people will die, but sometimes they will die in a very random situation with a car that did something totally unexpected. Do we want that? I saw the question of the surgeon. Would you prefer a surgeon with this success rate or an AI surgeon with a higher success rate? I need to see, does this AI surgeon botch a very easy surgery? Something that I would never expect to go wrong, right? Does that ever happen? That's the kind of thing that I think we need to think a bit better about that.
I think that's fair. There's probably a lot of people who would still argue that if the number of deaths is lower, it doesn't really matter that some of the deaths are weird and probably wouldn't happen with a human driver because overall the number is better. But we're humans after all. And for the self-driving car adoption, that's probably one of the bigger reasons, right? Because we do have accidents all the time and people die all the time and nobody really talks about it. It doesn't make it, at least to my news cycle. But every time there is a self-driving car doing something silly like this, like you described, the entire tech world knows about every single one of those accidents, right?
Yeah.
So there is also that bit. Which brings me to this little situation with Elon Musk, because you can't talk about AI and you can't talk about self-driving cars without Elon Musk. But I'm conflicted on that. Regardless of what you think of the guy, Tesla is a big thing, right? It basically made electric cars what they are today, whether you like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And the self-driving car that he keeps moving the goalpost every year, and my Tesla with the quote-unquote full self-driving thing doesn't fully self-drive itself. It's a really nice cruise control, but you have to pay attention because on occasion we'll do something very silly.
Mm-hmm.
It does help on longer distances, especially when you've got like a lot of highway usage. And it works. But in order to get a company like Tesla to the ridiculous valuation that it is or was at, you have to hype people up, right? So like part of that job description is basically create all this hype. And that's why we end up with all these predictions. There's a list of them. If you Google Elon Musk AI predictions, letting alone the self-driving cars being there next year, you got all the things about how AI is going to be better at everything and all of that. So basically, what I'm getting at is that you've got this conflicting thing that if you want to get money and attract attention, you have to color the facts a little bit. Yeah. And to a certain degree, I can understand that. This is why so many people do that, probably. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you're probably doing yourself a disservice, because if you build it up as a really good cruise control, then people who actually appreciate cruise control wouldn't be evaluating that as a full self-driving thing, right? So I don't know what your thoughts on that are. I do know what your thoughts on that are because I read your book. But if you wouldn't mind sharing with the others who haven't.
Yeah, you should read my new book. I think you have it there with you. Yeah, Silicon. Because I speak a lot about this. What's going on in the tech industry in general? Why are we hyping up things like that? And why are so many people not doing much, not working much, or not producing products that are actually used or that actually deliver what they are supposed to? And I think, as you said, hype is capitalized by some people, right? It brings attention, it brings money. And also, in an ideal world, the true value of a company is related to the summation of future dividends that you could collect, adjusted for the time value of money and risk, blah, blah, blah. But it's a summation of the money you expect to collect as an owner of the company, right? But there are other ways to make money too. If you convince someone else that your company will make money in the future and you sell them your shares of the company, provided that you walk out early enough, you can still make money from hype, even if it's void hype, right? A lot of people capitalize on this. So one example is with WeWork. WeWork was a company that lacked one essential thing to build a solid business, which is to be able to establish a moat around your business, which is a way to protect your customers. only when you can protect your customers does it make sense to subsidize the growth of the company with other people's money to try to grow it really quickly, because then these people are locked in. With social networks, that happens a lot. People, once a social network works, people don't go anywhere else because they're hanging out and all their friends are there. With WeWork, that didn't exist. It was a real estate company. If the office had nice coffee, but the day the subscription went up a little bit, people would maybe switch to another office. Right? The owner of the company, he sold his shares privately. He made $700 million from that before the company collapsed, before this famous failed IPO of the company. So he still made a profit. And he got so much publicity that now he received a lot of funding to create a similar company, despite the death of WeWork. So people can capitalize on this. Is another thing. The whole system that brings money to tech, it has a layer of people in between. So it's always other people's money. So for example, a startup gets money from a VC, a venture capitalist. But the venture capitalist doesn't invest its own money, mostly. Sometimes a little bit, but most of the time, they raise money from others. These others are sometimes pension funds that give money to VC, but pension funds are collecting money from people who are saving for retirement. There's 4 layers of other people's money. And a lot of these people charge a commission for managing the money. For example, VCs, they charge a 2% yearly fee to the people who give them money for the management of the money, regardless of the success of the investment. And what some people have been pointing out is that there's what they call fee stacking. If you hype up your performance, right? You pretend that the businesses you supported are doing very well. Usually within the first couple of years of a business, you can't really know if it's going to go well or not. So you need to use other metrics or invent metrics. So you hype it up. And what happens is that then other people want to invest in your next fund. So you create one fund, then another fund, thanks to the hype from the previous fund, and you collect lots of fees. Some of the biggest VCs at the moment, VC firms, they are collecting $500 million a year in management fees, which are independent of the outcome of your investments. So I think the incentives may be a bit strange, right? Because they promote hype in the sense that hype can help people make money. And I'm not saying they're doing it on purpose or in a conscious way, but sometimes it's just the metrics. You optimize for certain metrics, so you believe that metric is the same thing as building a solid business. So you optimize for that metric, like the valuation of the company, right? The valuation of the company is not really the value of the company. It's just what people subjectively thought the value of the company was. And that's the thing, you're building self-driving cars and it's in your best interest maybe to hype up what you're doing because the valuation is going to go up. Then the investors will be happy because they can get another round of funding from others to collect money because look, the valuation of the company I invested in has gone up. But then you also get more investment to your company because everybody's speaking about it. So there's a whole series of things that make hype lucrative for a lot of people.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, the world runs on vibes, apparently. Mm-hmm. And you have to learn how the game is played.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop at this, right? So far we've covered a lot of things that are potentially weird, but none of this is nefarious. You do have a few nefarious examples of like your mini Theranos in the book, and I don't know how much you want to keep in the book so that people go and grab it and how much you would like to share. But it doesn't stop at just like weird incentives here and there. It can get quite ugly, can't it?
Yeah. I think in the book I called it the mini Theranos. I worked for a company. It was actually a very big company. And we were building AI or an AI system to help executives make important decisions about the business that could affect a lot of people, like firing a lot of people, right? So these executives, it was an AI-based, AI-first solution. Someone created a team because AI is supposed to be amazing. So let's create a team and do whatever we can do with AI. And I joined the team when this had already been partially built. So I was helping improve it a little bit. The system, I immediately realized this is never going to work because we're trying to create insights about certain decisions with data that we don't have. So we need different data for this, but we can't have it. We can't collect this data. So we have the wrong data for this. But at that point, it was too late, right? It had been promised to people in the company. What I started to notice was that the system outputted really nonsensical things that you could tell this recommendation from the system it's probably very bad. So they added a layer that overrode the outputs of AI. So AI generated an output and it was aligned with something else a little bit manually. And as I went to meetings with these executives that were trying out the tool, sometimes it went like this. The executive would say, I tested this decision that, so what this AI would tell me about this decision. And they told me to do one thing. However, I've actually already made the opposite decision like a month ago. So it's contradicting me. So why is that? And then the managers of the team, they would say, oh, there might be a bug somewhere. Let us see. So then we would go and override the output to align with what the executives wanted to hear. So we're building, in a way, a fake AI solution that produced outputs that matched the decisions they wanted to make, right? Which was very shady, right? At one point, the AI system that was actually very big and it was almost not used at all. So we executed the code and we produced these outputs, but then they were all pretty much overwritten. I once had to they made me replace an Excel file with some results with another Excel file with other results, right? It was all very shady and very ethically compromising. And I think that's when I saw one of the worst sides of this AI hype thing. And it's all very unfortunate. I don't think the project was born that way. They said, oh, we're going to build a shady tool to justify our decisions. It was, again, and I explain in the book all the process to get you there, but I think there's a lot of enthusiasm. That's how this is born. AI can help us make decisions. And then people go overboard and they hire too many employees for those tools before validating them well or validating them correctly. I've seen teams of 70 people hired to build an AI tool before even knowing what the tool will be. They're like, AI is amazing. We'll find something to do with it. So let's put together an AI team. I've seen companies hire a corporate communications specialist for the team because AI will be so good that we want an expert to convey or communicate what's happening to the rest of the company. So they go overboard. And then when you realize that AI isn't doing what you promised so much to everyone, but you hired dozens of people, are you going to tell that to others in the organization? Are you going to tell, oh, by the way, no, we were wrong? Because then you're afraid that your team will disappear. So that's when people start lying. And I've seen it a little bit too many times, this pattern.
Yeah, and then it ends up with a bunch of wasted money, a bunch of wasted time, and typically it's kept on the D-low because it's not something you want to advertise.
No, exactly. Yeah.
But it can get even more ugly than that, right? I recall the Santa Clara AI fraud that actually went to court. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us that story?
So I don't remember all the details now, but I think it was someone was sued for pretending to use AI when they were not using AI. They were creating some videos, but they were done manually or something like that. And he went to court. I don't remember all the details now because I read about that a long time ago. And I think we have quite a few new ones, right? Like this Amazon Fresh thing of humans doing the work. But yeah, it can get a bit ugly sometimes.
Yeah. And again, I think it's more to do with hype than necessarily AI, because AI in this example, at least to me, it seems like the hammer, right? And when you've got a hammer, everything looks like the nail.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to resist that temptation.
I know. And that's the beginning of all AI failed projects. It starts with this attitude of, I have the hammer. What do I do with AI? For example, I know a company, they created a hammer searching for nails team, basically. Let's create a team that will speak with others in the organization to try to see what can be done with AI. And that creates a conflict of interest. It doesn't look like it, but it does, because if they don't find anything that could be done with AI, let's say this quarter, these people are afraid for their team. They were going to disappear. So they invent something or they pretend that it will be easier to use AI to solve a problem, which is what happened in that team, right? Sometimes it's even comical. There was an accounting startup. So it's a startup that builds accounting software. And they reached out to me because they were looking for help to find what they could do with ChatGPT. They wanted to add a ChatGPT-based feature to their accounting app. And they wanted me to help them brainstorm what that could be. But I was like, hold on a second. Why do you want to add ChatGPT for something in the first place? Do you know what they told me? Do you want to try to guess what that was?
Tell me.
So they told me that they were trying to raise funding from VCs. This was in the middle of the ChatGPT boom. And they told me, we can't tell VCs that we're not using ChatGPT for something.
Yeah.
That never ends well because there's a disconnect with customers, with what they want, right? When you try to push AI everywhere. There's this author called Tom Goodwin who said that he felt that technology used to be pulled by people. And now it's pushed onto people. Before we wanted this, I think we all wanted faster internet connection. When the internet came out, I was like, I remember the potential we saw. Yeah, we saw so much potential in the internet, but it was like, I can't believe, I remember my phone line would be busy. I wouldn't be able to take phone calls when I was connected to the internet because you use that line. We need something better. And then optic fiber and other things came by and it was great. And that we needed that. But it feels like a lot of technology is being pushed now onto people, like augmented reality goggles, lots of AI things that are trying to be pushed. I think that happens a lot with AI. How can we make our organization AI driven? Why do you want that?
Yeah, I can think of a few other examples. Metaverse, anybody? That seems to no longer be the thing. I'm forgetting how many billions of dollars of the electric car project.
That was ridiculous. Again, a technology first project. Look, I remember seeing ads here in London. You know, when you take the underground and there's free magazines that they hand out, free newspapers. There was one that had a gigantic ad on the back. It was a picture of firefighters using goggles, and it said the metaverse is going to help firefighters. Right? I heard from a firefighter actually telling me that's not how they actually work. The picture, it seems like they never spoke with a firefighter. But anyway, to me, it was like, why do they need to spend so much money on these ads to tell the world that the metaverse is actually important? They're trying to push it. And it's dead now, isn't it? I think they've canceled the whole thing.
Yeah, but you said earlier that innovation is basically about coming up with things that nobody thought about. So isn't that just kind of part of the game that you have to come up with and see what sticks if you want to do it as a company that's expected to innovate, right? Like you've got quarters, you've got shareholders, you've got earnings to announce.
Yeah, a lot of real problems need innovation. A lot of real problems that we know that exist are being solved in a bad way. I can give you lots of examples, but one of them is I spoke with this guy who works in aircraft maintenance. That airlines, they rent planes. They don't usually buy the planes. So sometimes the owner of the plane gets a plane back from an airline and then they rent it out to another airline. So in between, they need to check that the first airline did all the maintenance properly. How does it work now, like 21st century? There's literally a stack of paper because all the maintenance records are forms filled in by hand by a technician, and every country does it differently. So all forms look differently. They literally had to go through all the papers to do that. That's this verification. This sounds like the kind of thing that could be done in a better way with technology. And there are so many examples like this in old industries where things are done in a very old-fashioned way. And I think it's a pity because you have all these engineers trying to innovate by solving problems that nobody has. And there are so many real problems that nobody wants to tackle. Do you know about this Juicero company? This startup Juicero.
Oh, yes. The famous Juicero.
Right. Building a juice pressing machine that costs $700. Nobody's going to buy that. But the capsule cost $5 to $7. The capsule you put in the machine, like an espresso capsule, means it would cost you $5 to $7 to produce a glass of juice. And it was Wi-Fi connected, the fancy juice pressing machine. The company got $120 million in investment. It obviously failed pretty much immediately because nobody bought the product. People even realized they could press the capsule with their hands and just produce the juice. And yeah, the innovation, but some people said, or investors said, this could be the new Nespresso, But there were lots of differences. With the coffee, you actually need a lot of pressure to produce good coffee, right? We don't have that with juice, or the capsule in espresso capsules didn't cost that much. But yeah, you have talent devoted to that and then not to fix this airport or airline thing, right? So I think, yeah, you could innovate on problems that exist.
For sure. And I think obviously with hindsight, it's always 10 out of 10. But I'm sometimes wondering if Juicero was just started to give MBAs around the world something to analyze and see how not to start a company and how not to innovate.
You wish people would have learned, but they keep doing it again and again.
That said, as far as I know, there's no documentary on Netflix or anywhere about Juicero, and we do have one about WeWork, and there is one about Theranos. So I think if you've got a documentary about your company failing, you've achieved something.
Yeah.
And you're going to be remembered.
Yeah. You may be able to very easily build the next company because of all the attention you get.
Yeah, I can keep failing upwards. That's the way to do it. But yeah, I think a lot of people would agree. And there's a lot of the sentiment, I think, at least in my little echo chamber, about how people who generally enjoy. I think most of engineers, software engineers and otherwise, they actually generally enjoy solving problems. It's just that if the financial incentives are to solve the problem of maximizing the time that you spend glued to an algorithm and in the script social media page, rather than doing something a little bit better for humanity, it's just that statistically a lot of people have to basically make that choice, and that's how it goes.
But something I've discovered over the past few years, speaking with lots of engineers, is that a lot of them are miserable at the moment. There's a lot of misery. There's a lot of people making a lot of money, but being miserable, right? Which sounds like it's hard to speak about this because it sounds like so privileged. But I've met a lot of people who are miserable. And the problem is that they feel that they're nerds. They love the idea of building stuff, but they want to build stuff that matters, that someone's going to use one day. And then they find themselves in teams that are victims of hype, too many people for very little to do. And all they do is go to meetings and meetings, following all this Scrum methodology. So it's meetings every day to speak about work and extend tasks, stretch them out, pretend that they're more difficult than they are. And I think that's causing a lot of misery. I wrote an article about this that went viral once, and a lot of people, hundreds of them, reached out to me to tell me in private a lot because they're afraid to say that publicly, to tell me like, I'm absolutely miserable. People tell me I work 15 minutes a day, but I'm not happy. It's not like I go scuba diving the rest of the time. I just sit around because I need to be there. And I've been in that situation myself a few times. That's what led me to my second book, Silicon. And I remember a friend telling me that I sounded like Meghan Markle when I complained, and Prince Harry, because you have a good job, you're paid well, and you don't do anything. So why do you complain about? I think it's a good thing you complain about that, because it's not a good thing that people are paying others not to do anything or to just sit there and go to meetings where nobody listens. That's not good for the economy or for economic development or to put resources to good use. So it's a good thing to not be happy about that.
Yeah. No, that's for sure. And I think this is a well-known sentiment at the moment because I think at least to a certain degree, this is a byproduct of cheap money for a long stretch of time, right? And money flowing abundantly into companies and the big tech giants basically hiring people just so that the competition can't hire them and all of that. And then, we had all these people going on things like Instagram and doing, a day in life of a software engineer at this company and showing how they basically did no work. Yeah. They went from one coffee to another meeting to another one-on-one to another whatever, and they had their laundry done, catering in the office. And obviously, I think for a lot of people who actually went and published that didn't end very well, but a lot of people were just a little bit more silent about it. And they ended up being this tiny little cog in a massive machine with almost no expectation to do anything. And I don't know if it's the biggest kind of factor here. There's also the fact that a lot of projects do get killed, right? I've heard this story on so many blogs from ex-Googlers who spent X number of years working on something, and then all of a sudden, Google, in its now trademark tradition, just kills the project, despite people actually using it and liking it. And then you find yourself thinking, okay, so I spent all this time on this. I just made a little project a little better that got killed, and I'm basically where I was 3 years ago.
you spoke about the cheap money, right? There's a whole chapter in my new book about that, because as I researched why this latest wave of hype in the tech industry happened, because it was crazy, not AI related, like even before, it was insane. 2021 was the record year of investment in tech in history. It was really dramatic, the amount of money there were 700 new unicorns that year. So two new billion-dollar companies a day, which is obviously not sustainable. That can be true. And a lot of people brought up the question of low interest rates, which we had for quite some time, since the 2008 crisis. And when you look at economics, it seems that a lot of mainstream economic theories don't see a problem with that. So you have low interest rates, that creates more investment. Companies want to invest more. That's great. More innovation and stuff. But there have been different schools of thought, even very different ones, who've been warning people for quite some time that it causes a misallocation of resources. Or that's what the Austrian school would say. And then you have all the post-Keynesians that would say this causes financial instability. Because they even call it Ponzi finance. You have cheap money and people end up borrowing money they can return, or they need to borrow more money to pay interest on the previous money at one point when interest rates go up. I'm still researching this, but my intuition tells me that there was a lot of this, And the proof is that investment in tech went down dramatically when interest rates went up about a year ago, right? And startups are collapsing at record rates at the moment because there's not as much money as there used to be. And this was engineered. When you look at the Bank of England, there's a document where they literally say, we did this quantitative easing program and all of these programs to try to lower interest rates so that money managers would reallocate money toward riskier stuff. So it was on purpose designed, because now your money doesn't pay interest in safe assets anymore. So you're going to chase yield in unsafe assets. And that's why a lot of money went to technology companies. And I think I almost sensed that when I worked in tech, that I saw this kind of thing. Like, you wouldn't do this unless money was cheap. You wouldn't spend money so stupidly if money wasn't cheap or money wasn't abundant. Right? You would be more careful. You wouldn't do this. Right? You wouldn't launch a Juicero probably in that if money was a bit tighter. Yeah. And I think with economic policy, you need to see both sides of the equation. Yeah, there's more innovation, but how much of that is BS? How much of that is Juicero? And how much is it genuine innovation, right?
Yeah, I like how we now have a word, Juicero, to describe a bad idea that went way too far.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about one last thing from your book before we move on to the next adventure. The Turing test. I think we haven't touched on that, and this is an important milestone. So I think most people obviously know that this is the test that's basically supposed to fool humans into thinking that they're talking to another human, when in reality it's AI. And it's been held as a gold standard for AI progress for a long time now, longer than I can remember, really. And in your book, you cover the Turing test that was administered by the University of Reading. I found it an interesting story. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that story, I included that to show how things are twisted very often in AI. So the University of Reading, they did this competition for the Turing test. They had many teams compete, and a human would speak against the chatbot and try to distinguish humans versus robots, try to see if the test would pass. And my problem with that is that the university itself, the headlines in its own website were, the Turing test has passed, right? And when you read between the lines, you could see that the Turing test hasn't been passed. The whole experiment was done in a very weird way. They let people speak against the chatbot for a very limited amount of time, for instance. And the number of people that were fooled, let's say, by the robot, there were quite a few, but there were also quite a few that weren't. I don't remember the right numbers. But what I remember of that story being so troubling is you have a university writing these sensationalist headlines, twisting results, and almost designing a test in a way that will favor the machine so that the Turing test is passed. Right? So I think it was a very disingenuous way of universities also do this thing of hyping up AI. And that was an example of it.
Yeah, for sure. You complained a little bit about, I'm going to say, the other futurists. And I'm going to ask you now to put your own thinking cap on and become a futurist.
Ooh.
And from where you're sitting, what predictions do you make so that we can record them and then go back to that 5 years from now and say, oh, wrong?
Yeah.
Where do you see this going?
Where do I see this going? I think AI will become a tool that a lot of people will use. It will become a part of our lives like it is at the moment. I don't think it will be a dramatic change like the internet was. It's not that transformational. It doesn't let us do things that we couldn't do. Sometimes a little bit better or faster, but it's not, as important, I think, as it was. So I think it will be an interesting incremental change. We'll use AI as an assistant mostly. I think there will be a lot of disappointment in terms of commercial applications based on AI that will be successful. I think it won't go very well. A lot of people think that so many companies are going to make so much money from their wrapper around an LLM that does this or does that. But because AI hallucinates, because you can't control the output very well, so you need to write a super long prompt and it doesn't save as much time as you think. So I think there won't be that many successful commercial applications, which means that a lot of people will lose money, the investments. I think there will be a lot of disappointment commercially. But I think LLMs will keep moving forward toward being good assistants. But I don't think there will be a breakthrough soon in terms of them breaking that ceiling, the hallucination, eliminating hallucinations. So I don't know if this is a very futuristic kind of prediction, but I think there will be more of the same that we have. There will be a plateau, I think, in terms of development. And that will
But do you think there's potential for a breakthrough in terms of costs, of how much it actually costs in dollars and electricity units to run these projects, to run these LLMs?
I think
because right now, they're very expensive, and it looks like it could be plausible to figure out a cheaper way of running them so that they can be more ubiquitous and run well on your iPhone.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to happen?
I think that is likely because I think there's probably a lot of room for optimization of what exists, and people are already working on that. And I saw that when I did my PhD on AI and convolutional neural networks and stuff. I saw that a lot. People who build a system to do this, and I could make it like 3 times smaller or 5 times smaller or even more, just by thinking a bit more about the responsibilities of the different components and realizing this is not necessary, right? So there is a tendency that first you build things that are too big, and then you can trim out the things that don't matter. So I think there is room for optimization. I think they're already doing that. So we'll see. I think I read an article the other day saying that a lot of these systems need to be retrained with new data as opposed to just incorporate little by little new data as it appears. But there may be methods to improve that. So I think there's room for a lot of optimization. So I think it will be cheaper and more efficient to run those things. Yeah.
And personally, I don't think that's a bad future. If we can get something that's as powerful as the latest state of the art to run on your phone that doesn't cost millions of dollars to acquire, and can give you maybe 95% of that performance, and it's nicely incorporated into a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's positive. Yeah. I think again, my other prediction, I think the productivity gains. Like, a lot of people are saying that what's dramatic here is the productivity gain will witness. I think that will be very low. I think, yes, it makes certain tasks less annoying, quicker, but I don't see this as being super groundbreaking. I think a lot of people, they compare AI against a certain level of work that isn't too skilled, like could be very junior kind of level of work. But there's a whole other type of work that you do sometimes that is not that mechanical. For example, when you work as a software engineer, as you evolve in your career, you end up being more on the business side of things, hopefully. So my role is to help a business solve a problem. Yeah. It's not to write snippets of code. I want to see what, and sometimes I find that myself doing that a lot lately. I'm going to help you pick the feature that provides the lowest hanging fruit for you, what's easiest to build, but also will help the business achieve a business goal. And thinking of all those things is a very human kind of thing to do. And there's a lot of human negotiation sometimes. I love optimization algorithms, mathematical optimization. I'm a big fan of them, finding the best solution to a problem. And what happens with optimization is that lots of problems are intractable. You can't find the best solution. So you need to give up on something. And business people have no idea about how any of this works. So as an engineer, you need to speak their language to try to negotiate. Say, okay, what if instead of solving this problem, we simplify it a little bit this way? Would you be okay with that? Right? And then you get to solve a problem. And that's all the kind of human thing, that kind of thing that we can write a recipe for, which involves a lot of negotiation, soft skills, business. And I think that a lot of people, they say ChatGPT will do the work of writers, but they've never spoken with a writer or a screenwriter. They think AI will write TV shows. Yeah, and maybe there are certain TV shows, maybe soap operas that they just recycle the same thing all the time. But if you speak with a screenwriter that writes a top level show and you see what they do, then you will realize that potentially will not be able to do this. I often give an example of the show Homeland, the spy show from the US. Every year, the seasons seem to speak about what was going on in the news, things people were speaking about. But the show was shot a year before, so how do they know? What they did is they called it spy camp. They met people who were the writers of the show, and even the actors, the whole crew, met ex-CIA people. They met Edward Snowden once to brainstorm the things that next year will be relevant, or what are topics we can cover. All that work went, and that's why the show was successful, right? So it's very easy to know nothing about screenwriting and say AI will do screenwriting. Look, I asked ChatGPT to produce a script, and look, it looks great. But you don't know how to write a script that will really click with people and all the things that takes. And that's why I think in terms of productivity, yeah, maybe the little tasks here and there that are quite mechanical are going to be improved a little bit. Even then, you often need someone to validate them because they hallucinate. But then there are other bigger tasks that are very human oriented, that involve lots of human connections, that it can't do that. I spoke with a journalist, and she was telling me the big value of my work is my connections, because I built a network of people I trust in my region. So whenever I need commentary about something, I can reach out to them and they will give me a quote for my articles, right? If I move to a new city, I start from scratch because I don't know anyone. So it's AI can write an article potentially with proper grammar, but being a journalist is not about writing an article with proper grammar. In fact, you can write a bad article and there's probably an editor or someone's going to fix it. It's about your connections, your research. So I don't know if this answers your question, but yeah.
It does. It's the same thing we're seeing over and over again, right? It's a different thing to have a really good cruise control that can drive 90% of the time and then expects you to just take over immediately when it doesn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And very different to say, oh, take me there and go back and take a nap in the back of the car.
Yeah.
Just like it is with journalism, and just like it is, you mentioned, you spend 20% of your day writing the code, and that's optimistic. Even if writing that code is twice faster, you save yourself 10%. And
yeah,
it's a small portion. It helps, but it's not necessarily a game changer. And I haven't watched the Homeland show, but the ones that I did try out, I feel like half of them must be written by ChatGPT at this stage already, because the quality dropped. But maybe that's just
it ended the show. It ended before ChatGPT was a thing. Yeah, but did you see what you just said? The quality dropped, so it may have been written by ChatGPT. So associating good quality with something that has that thing that ChatGPT can do. That's what you just said, right? And I think that's quite accurate. I think very good quality work requires that human touch that is very difficult to define. But I've seen it a lot lately in my writing. I've learned what writing is about, and it's not about putting words together. It's about finding the right angle, clicking with the audience, understanding your audience. I've worked with designers lately to design book covers and stuff, and I realized it's not about the drawing itself. It's about finding the way to convey the thesis of your book in an image. for instance. And that's very hard to do, and it requires a lot of thinking. But with writing, it's like with coding, putting the words down, it's a very minor part of the work, which is what ChatGPT can help with, right? And I like that, what you said, the high quality. There's a whole market for low quality work, for good enough. And I think that's what's going to suffer. One example is the writing of blog articles to pack them with keywords, all the SEO thing. You have these articles, 20 things to do in Paris this summer, parentheses, 2024. And there's just a list of things, very poorly curated list of things to do in Paris, because and people used to hire freelancers on Upwork or Fiverr to do this very cheaply, produce lots of articles, because what you want is to drive traffic to your website. You don't want a good article. You don't care. Yeah. I think those are the jobs that are going to suffer, because now people are using ChatGPT for that kind of thing. The same thing with an image or an illustration. If you just want an image to put on an ad that's going to last an ad campaign for 2 weeks, just to test out a message or the messaging for an ad, then it's okay. You just produce any image. You don't need a designer or super creative person or super professional person to do it. So I think, as you said, high quality work tends to have this human edge that AI can't do, I think.
Let's see how this ages. Let's see how that sounds in 5 years from now.
You wanted predictions, yeah. There you have it.
There we go.
And you have it on record, on the record. We'll see.
Yeah, humans are so weird. Like, we've got the tendency to both undervalue and overvalue how special humans are, right? Mm-hmm. We want them to be special above other organisms and all of that. And then it turns out that we actually run on a lot of the same chemistry, and other primates can use tools and we feel less special. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we also undervalue humans. I know the example that comes to mind is I was following Tesla early on, and they over-automated their factories, right? And then things get breaking and cascading, and they went back and they put a bunch of humans in there as well. They can figure things out on the fly, and turns out that worked nicely. And I think you're going to find a lot of examples of undervaluing humans as well.
Yeah.
So it seems like we never get it right. We either go over the top or under. You mentioned Siliconed, your next book, and it's actually sitting on my desk. I haven't read it yet, but I will.
Yeah, thank you.
People, I think from our conversation and a few plugs that you did here and there, and they probably can get the gist of what the book is covering. Do you want to say anything more about it?
I would just say that I've noticed that sometimes when you work in tech, you're between a rock and a hard place, because it's either I don't do much. This is the reality of a lot of people. Some people get offended because they're like, I work very hard, but there are a lot of people who don't work very hard. And the proof is that they can be fired en masse. Like it happened a couple of years ago, and companies still run. Like Twitter is running with only 10% of its employees. So they probably weren't doing much. But I either don't do much, I just go to a few meetings, or I build products that I know nobody will ever use. Like they have obvious flaws, but it's some dream by some investor. So it's become very hard for a lot of people to produce useful things. And the book is the result of my research on why this happened. So the book first kind of explains what's been going on, but then it analyzes the causes, like low interest rates, like we mentioned, and the way the incentives are structured in venture capital. So there are a few reasons. And there's a lot of research, a lot of references. I know that the title sounds a bit like Silicon. It sounds like a bit dramatic, but it's actually quite a serious book. And I felt I wanted it out there.
A little clickbaity, yes.
Sorry?
A little clickbaity, yes, for sure.
A little bit, yeah. You have to be. That's something I've learned working with humans who've helped me. You should see what my book titles were like for both my books before. With the lamest titles, the lamest subtitles. And these people have helped me produce something that's going to be more provocative. But yeah,
for sure.
I'm hoping that my book will start that conversation. And I wrote advice at the end on how to fix it. How can we fix tech? I don't know all the answers. I wrote some ideas of how we can make it better. Yeah.
Okay, so this is available. What's next in the pipe? Give us a little sneak peek of your next book project. Ooh. I'm guessing, if I can predict from patterns, it's also going to be yellow.
Maybe it will have to be. That was another discussion we had with the designer is, do we change the color? Do we create a brand here? Yeah, I think so. I've been working on another book that doesn't belong to this series, I would say, which is called Engineer's Pocket Guide to Surviving AI. Right? So it's a book for a publisher that writes technical books, usually programming books. But they told me a lot of engineers are worried about their careers. They think that it's not even worth becoming a software engineer now because AI will do it. So a lot of things we discussed today I've written in that book. And then continuing this line of hype books, I think I don't know yet, but I think I'm very tempted to write a book on economics because I've been learning a lot about economics, which started with this book, Silicon, when I learned about interest rates and all of that. I've learned a lot about economics. I have lots of books here, like textbooks and all books on economics. I think with economics, we are witnessing a little bit of this hype and confusion. After 2008, what was revealed was that economic theories weren't very good. They didn't predict that the crisis could happen, right? And one thing I see is that there are alternative theories that are coming up. One of them is called modern monetary theory, MMT, that are becoming very popular to produce an alternative explanation of how the economy works. And I think my next book may analyze that because I think and this happens a lot with economics. An economist finds really awful stuff with previous theories. Sometimes economic theories, they're just terrible, but what they propose is another terrible theory because it's driven by ideology a lot, very driven by ideology. And when you look at MMT, that it has some virtues in the way it describes how banking works, for example, but then it goes south very quickly. It almost seems like a justification for policies that have failed horribly in the past. So I find that fascinating. And I think it matters to everyone. I think we should all try to understand how money works, how money is created. We've had a lot of inflation lately in places where we didn't, like here in the UK, in the US. So it's important for people to discuss, I think, economics. Yeah, just like AI is important to everyone right now, because even if you're not an AI person or a geek, AI may be relevant to your job. I think that the economics thing is very important. And that's something we'll see if that's something I want to write about in the future.
Looking forward to that. I think we're going to have to invite you again to talk about Silicon and maybe the next yellow book. And it's definitely a brand.
Yeah.
You're awesome to talk to. Thank you so much for coming.
No, thank you for having me.